Hello and welcome to our special show, Budget of Hope. We are here at the Indian School of Business and I have with me students and also professors who will give us reactions to the Union Finance Minister's budget for 2024-25. I have with me Professor Prasanna Tantri and also Professor Shashwat Alok. I'm going to go to you first. What's your initial reactions? The big focus seemed to be employment, and in fact the finance minister said employment is an acronym for all the different things, whether it's employment, middle class, productivity and so on.
Yeah, being from education sector, it's music to our ears to hear that human capital's value people have realized finally. And I think the big positive in this budget is the realization that the human capital that we have, most of it is not employable directly. There needs to be some incentive to the corporate sector to hire these people, and that is what the government has realized. And it's also an acknowledgement that the current kind of skill development programs are not delivering what they're supposed to deliver. So at least let corporates train these people and let's give them some incentives. This recognition, I think, is a big deal. You know, we can debate about the form of whether this 5,000 is adequate or 15,000 is adequate, but the fact that human skilling and that can happen in a private setup better than in a government setup is, I think, is a very it's a big change from the past. I have my, we can crib about anything and
but the big focus certainly employment in this particular budget, it appears, but it should also seem that, politically employment was perhaps the most sensitive part for this government as well.
I mean, both politically and economically. So the focus on youth-centered employment schemes is quite welcome, especially for the manufacturing sector. We really need to create jobs. And as Prasanna rightly pointed out, I concur with him. The challenge is how do you forecast which skills will be in demand in the future. Now what the government is doing is allowing the private sector to figure out what is the skills that they need. And at the source of the employment, you have on-jobs training, which I think one could ask for more and the government should always be pushed to do more. But it's a welcome change from the past. Largely, I think, despite having this show, budget should be a non-event. And I'm quite happy with the fact that stock markets have largely remained flat, which is a sign of a maturing economy. It's not a one-day, economy is not in a day, it's a continuous process. And the fact that budget is along expected lines gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Okay, so both of you are very enthusiastic about the fact that employment has been the focus, but whoever the corporates I heard in the morning, they said, we hope this incentive, employee-linked, whatever the incentive that the government is offering, I hope it's for the government sector and not for the private sector. They didn't seem so excited about it.
No, I think they have to see the fine print. The problem now is, if you, the productivity of the worker and the wage that they ask for, there is a gap between that. That is what this program is going to solve. And they will see, if those corporates don't hire, somebody else will hire. That, as Shashwat said, now a bureaucrat will not decide what skill or what training needs to be given. Market will decide. And if somebody is not enthusiastic, their competitor will be enthusiastic. So what it does is, it will basically bring down the cost of labor. And it can have shift from, some capital to labor as well. So the thing is, it's not whether this person likes it or not. Markets will ensure that, this person will have to like it and take it. If implemented well, if this comes with a lot of conditions, it comes with restrictions, then inspection and all, let's say it increases 10 more inspections, then nobody may be interested in this. So it should be implemented in the spirit it should be. And even if they are not, without too much of compliance, even if they are not enthusiastic today, they will be forced to. That's the beauty of markets.
Okay. Quick reactions from all of you. I know perhaps most of you want to be entrepreneurs, isn't it? And angel tax being removed, is that something that made you excited?
Yeah, so I think this is, again, as Shashwat said, ideally a budget should not be it should be a non-event, right? So the budget should be a checks and balances thing, and removing the agent tax. That is something which is great. Making sure that buybacks and dividends are then now priced equally, right? Because you get taxes the same rate. I think it goes to show that there is a clear incentive for them to simplify things. And angel tax, obviously removing that gives a huge fillip to entrepreneurs in India.
What was your big takeaway?
So, of course, one of the big takeaways is the gap between the STCG and the LTCG rates, right? So, though it's, of course, left some retail investors with a heartburn, it has affected the markets a little bit. I think the longer term of the government is to focus on long-term holdings and eventually create a mature market that values sustainable wealth creation. So, though it may affect futures and options trading in the short run, in the long term, the government seems to be focused on fostering longer-term holdings, yeah.
There's one thinking that the taxing on the long-term capital gains or short-term capital gains is because banks are actually losing the money, and therefore is that your understanding also, that trying to bring the money back into the banks?
Certainly not my understanding. I am a little confused about what people have been saying. So when I sell or buy a stock, there is a trader on the other side. If I am purchasing a stock from that person gets that capital. Now that person can either consume or put that money in the bank. That capital is ultimately flowing into the bank. I am generally more oriented towards free markets. Who are we to decide where should investors
But the economic survey also had this warning, isn't it? That too many people...
Yeah, unfortunately it did.
Unfortunately it did. Okay, what's your takeaway from the budget?
Major takeaways, it's a welcome move that the employment has been encouraged in this budget particularly, and also the fact that the angel investment tax has been reduced. I think that would also encourage entrepreneurial spirit, and it would certainly benefit the youth of India.
I think the real estate sector, the stock price of the real estate sector have fallen because a part of the drop in taxation would be reduced by the takeaway of the indexation benefit. So that's something that the real estate sector is very cautious of.
I in fact thought with the PM Awas Yojana and the money that was being spent in infra real estate is actually positive about this.
Yeah, definitely. It is a very welcoming move for this budget, and also the corporate tax cut, which about 5%, help to bring in more capital into the company, into the India, and maybe help to in making India campaign more successful.
So people have economic survey also spoke about even getting capital investment, the FDI perhaps from China, and that bringing down the rates. What is your big takeaway from this budget that the finance minister has announced?
So for me, the biggest takeaway was the angel tax reduction, because if we look at the differential between the number of angel investors in US and India, we recently touched around 25,000 like last year, and US has had like 300,000 10 years back. So I feel the growth will be fueled by startups in the coming years. So that reduction will definitely give the boost that is so desperately needed.
This is a startup-focused school, so the angel tax being abolished is obviously extremely exciting news for us. We're seeing unicorns being popped up here and there everywhere. This will only give us the right incentive to build something of our own and take the country forward.
Along with creating the employment, the skills required for the employment, one of the major takeaways is how the government is trying to cut the custom duties for the manufacturing sector, be it the energy, where they have cut custom duties on solar panels, would probably lead us to future healthy energy transition, and also on some of the other capital goods where the manufacturing sector will benefit a lot to create a cost competitive market.
My takeaway from the budget was the government is trying to reduce the fiscal deficit. They had initially planned to reduce the fiscal deficit by 5.1, now it's 4.9. So that's a huge welcoming move towards the economy.
I think it's safe to call it a mixed bag, that in the first half of the finance minister's speech, we saw they were all good news. Great news on employment, on jobs, on skilling. And that's when the second half came and a lot of retail investors and common people got upset. So in the first half, I think, as you've pointed out, that right before the elections, we saw how important it is for unemployment to be an agenda, a primary agenda for the government, which we didn't see in the previous budget. So that's great that that's the primary focus now. And on taxation, I think that does leave a sour taste even for retail investors who do fall in, some of them do fall in the middle class as well. They invest in, for real estate, that's not a problem, but they do invest in equity for the long term. And that does leave a sour taste for the common retail investors.
That should have been left untouched.
Right. So I think focusing on human capital, focusing on education, focusing on employment has been long due, and I think this budget has rightly focused on that and created great facilities for that. But as my batchmate over here has also mentioned, that changing the taxation was a little bit of a problem. I think I also view it as a little bit of a criticism that I would want to put forward for this budget, that the tax rules are being changed again and again. This was changed in the last budget as well. Now again the tax rules have been changed. It creates a little bit of an uncertainty and an instability within the minds of retail investors as well as everyone who is viewing India as a stable economy. That is my only point of concern, but other than that, I think a great budget.
Okay, fiscal deficit being brought down, everyone says is great news. But again, there is a contrarian view as well, isn't it? That money, if it was used in asset creation, would be a good idea?
Yeah, so I mean, fiscal deficit should be just based on what that deficit is funding. If that deficit is funding positive NPV investments, leading to good asset creation, it is not necessarily a bad thing, especially for an economy at the young growth stage that we are in.
Yeah, so I agree with that, except that operationally this year, 6 months, we are left with what, 6 months for another budget. You have to, last year they budgeted 10 lakh crore and spent 9 lakh 48. So what's the point in budgeting and if you're not able to spend? And what happens, with this top-down approach of allocation-based approach, because you've allocated, you give money to ministries. By February, they're under pressure to spend. Then positive NPV shows up on paper, because you have to get that money, otherwise money will be taken back. So given this year, given that it's a 6 months thing, it's not a full year budget, I think it was a wise thing to just pause and figure out and what's going on these projects. And as I said, there is, we don't, and in terms of deficits, we missed this point when we talk about India. 4.9 is of the center. There are states. If you add center and states, we are at 8%, which is the highest among all BBB rated countries, even the countries with high growth like Indonesia. Right, 8% is not a small number. It's a very big number. And if you see our interest payments, out of the 48 lakh crore budget, 12 lakh crore is interest payments. Our revenue is 31 lakh crore and 12 lakh crore.
Many Sri Lankas in the making.
Yeah, so if the problem is if the execution falters, remember when you make capex, you will have to spend resources on maintenance year on year. US, for example, has a gross savings rate of 18%, net of 5%. Where does 13% go? They have to maintain their assets. Now, if your execution slows down, if you just allocate without having actual projects on the ground, then you will have a lot of these resources going towards maintenance of assets without creating anything. So I think it was a welcome pause this year, given that there is shortage of time. Otherwise, in principle, I agree with Shashwat. You will not find any disagreement. You should not have called two finance professors. We'll agree mostly on everything, except that execution is important. So that's why I think this year it was a good thing to do.
Okay, both of you agreed on employment being the big focus. We said human resources the focus this time. But somehow was there enough spoken about? For instance, Ayushman Bharat didn't even get mentioned. I mean, it's something that we have been hoping will actually be, its net would be increased and so on. All that, isn't that a miss in a sense?
Yeah, I've been hoping and pleading also, for this. Yeah, that's, 7,300 crore plus 3,000 crore on asset creation for a 50 crore and the PM promised that they're going to cover elderly also this time. If you remember, all elderly will be covered.
And we were hoping this was
election promise. I think maybe it will come next year. Maybe they don't want to do it everything. So 10,000 crore, what happens is when you allocate 10,000 crore for treating 50 crore people, you start doing all kinds of, cesarean, for example, has to be done in 6,000 rupees. Then obviously it cannot be done. Good doctors will not come. So they have put caps on spending on each of these treatments. That will impact quality. Sadly, that's one I think is a big miss. They should have increased, but hopefully next year they'll do it.
And energy is another area of concern. While we spoke about climate resilient crops and research and so on and so forth, did you find enough in it to talk about the transition that we all are looking for?
I mean, green shoots, yes, right. So the challenge with energy, or more broadly deep tech, which includes space, defense, life sciences, is that these are long-term investments that will be rewards in the very long run. Now, private markets are generally not suitable to fund this. Debt requires interest payments immediately, while cash flows will come in the long run. Private equities and VCs have their own horizon. So the fact that government has recognized that this requires at least some financing from the government is a good move. Is the allocation enough as of now? Probably not. That needs to be expanded, but at least we are trending in the right direction. So it touches all the right notes. We could do more, but we will learn and probably improve in the next year.
Just want to add one point there, that they spoke about taxonomy this year. It's very, very important, because one of the things is we don't know what is green, what is not green, whether it can be mixed, what is a green bond, how do you define. When you start a new area, taxonomy is very, very important. Although there is no allocation here, I think it's if they do it well, that itself will help bring down cost of capital.
Understanding all these different kind of sectors and talking about, now they spoke about education loans. We still don't know the fine print, but in your mind, is it what is that as a youngster? Angel tax is one thing, okay, everyone says I want to be an entrepreneur and that brings in. But other than that, what is it that you saw in it which you thought was a good move and something that disappointed you?
I think the Mudra scheme has been now increased, so the coverage that was given earlier for the Mudra scheme has now increased under the Tarun scheme. So I think that is also So I think that is also a welcome move for small MSME borrowers. And other than that, for individual taxpayers also there has been some good news in the sense that the tax slab has been raised to 3 lakh for which you pay no tax, and also the standard deduction has now gone up from 50,000 earlier to 75,000 now. So I think that brings some incremental good news to the individual taxpayer.
Disappointment, something you're very excited about? What was your big, what did you feel happy about when the finance minister, nothing made you happy?
Definitely. I think as everyone's talked about the angel tax investment, the increase in that was definitely something welcoming as budding entrepreneurs. And I think specifically for me, I'm more interested in the energy field as well. So seeing, as Prof talked about, right, seeing that some of the clarification on what the taxonomy behind that stuff is very important to understand, because it's very easy to say, okay, let's make something green or let's do something green, but what is it actually, what does that mean, and how does that affect the economy is something which is very good to see from my end.
For me, focus on the MSME sector was paramount because India has around 70% of the employment is generated by the MSME sector, and a lot of employment is being promoted, and there has been increase in the MSME credit schemes, and Mudra loans have been increased roughly doubled, and this should promote our MSME sector for the long run in generating the revenues for country.
The economic survey spoke about more, bringing in FDI from China as well here. Is that something that is workable? We are talking about rates being brought down for any kind of FDI, but that is something that we need to plug into that supply chain, they say. How critical is it at the stage that we are, the kind of challenges that we have?
Absolutely critical. One of the things that finance ministers have been ignoring for last 10 years is our savings rate. Our savings rate has fallen from 39% to 30%. It's a secular decline. We don't understand why. And plus the new tax thing, students will hate me for this, has made it even worse. Now, when you want to grow, you need to invest, right? If a domestic saving, China, when they grew, it used to be 45%. Indonesia is today also is 38%. We are at 29.2% now, from 39% in 2007-8, and continuously we are dropping. It's a secular decline, maybe lifestyle or whatever. Now then the only option remains FDI. FDI is so much more important than what we think for us. So this 40 to 35% is a great move they did. But eventually, both of us will say the same thing. Taxation alone will not, it's one of the factors. You have to make, ease of doing business is the only solution. Taxation is only one part of it. We are spending too much time on taxation. You have to make, if your inspector is coming every day, you get unexpected GST notices tomorrow. If some rule is interpreted in a different way by authorities the other day, if there is no certainty, if it requires 20 approvals. When Ford wanted to leave India, if you remember, in Mumbai, they faced court cases to shut down. So if you have, as long as you have all these issues, how much ever you bring down your taxes. You remember Dabhol Energy, India gave a sovereign credit guarantee interest rate of 10%. Nobody invested. There was a time where you used to give 10% sovereign guarantee interest rate when Japan's interest rate used to be 0%. How much FDI we used to get? If these incentives, these are like extra toppings on the basic stuff is, you should be able to do business easily, enter and exit easily. So that is what you have to fix. That's one of my grouse here. We are very happy.
The Minister has spoken about review in a larger sense as well. I mean, she has said that we are going to do a comprehensive review of this kind of a regulatory environment which we have had.
So they have, right?
So what are the specific steps that you think are required now?
So the devil is going to be in the details and execution. Again, I don't have any specific specs except for the fact that we need stability, whether it's tax policy, whether it's policy for encouraging FDI, employment. What we need is a longer term vision. Where do we want to see ourselves 10, 20 years down the line? Work backwards. Don't tinker with policies every year unless something is really not working out for us. So as Prasanna said, I expect more stability and continuity going forward, more focus and thrust on R&D, but government can only do so much. A lot of it has to be private sector driven. So the fact that they are providing incentives for the private sector to pick up, whether it's manufacturing, employment or innovation, that I think needs to continue for sure.
In that sense, perhaps what the economic survey said and what is being reflected now in the budget seems to be at least in tandem, isn't it? When they put the onus largely on the private sector and state governments as well to create that employment. Do you see that as something that is working harmoniously?
Yeah, so private sector will do if incentives are right. The problem is, as Shashwat said, this inconsistency. For instance, on the one hand, you encourage cash flow driven lending. On the other hand, RBI says it's risky and they'll increase capital adequacy. Now, what will you can say I've given the other example. You bring down fiscal deficit, but RBI keeps real rate at 3, the finance minister said that core inflation is 3%. Repo rate is 6.75. What does it say about real rate? 3.75. Forget about food inflation. No food inflation, you can't do anything. So when different parts of the government, if they move in different directions, then you can keep lecturing the private sector. What will the private sector do? With 3.75% real rate, how do I invest? Then my productivity should be so high to generate anything.
So to wrap it up, what is this budget?
So budget is given the constraints, it's a good thing, but it's a good start, but they have to identify what's a binding constraint. In some cases binding constraint could be the regulator. In some cases it's not neither they did not speak a word about regulator. I think the biggest binding constraint in India are these autonomous regulators. So it's not the private sector or the state governments. They have to talk about them. You have to think about, these are not like Supreme Court or Election Commission where they have a constitutional freedom. They have a freedom if they do what they're supposed to do, right? So there needs to be a review of what the regulators can do, and they need to act based on this. This I told you. On one hand you give credit guarantee and you want to encourage this cash flow based lending. On the other hand you call it risky and clamp down. So then the objective will not be achieved. So they have to recognize that regulators are undoing a lot of the good things the government is doing.
So good beginning, continuity and consistency, that's what the business school expects. Not talking about the politics of what happened in the budget itself, but that's for another debate. Thank you so much for watching.